Welcome to Goventra Academy. Today we're going to explore where AI and CMS-regulated marketing begin to intersect, where organizations are becoming increasingly exposed, and why governance can no longer operate separately from execution. Now, before we get into the operational side of this discussion, I want to briefly level set who Goventra is and why this conversation matters. Goventra Academy was created to help organizations build practical governance literacy around data, AI, workflow accountability, and operational alignment. The goal isn't to make governance theoretical or overly academic. The goal is to make it operationally usable. We focus on helping leaders and teams understand how governance connects directly to day-to-day execution across systems, workflows, approvals, and decision-making environments. And with that context in mind, I also want to briefly introduce myself and the perspective I'm bringing into this discussion. I'm Atoussa Fukuda, Senior Executive Advisor for Responsible AI and Healthcare Marketing at Goventra. My background includes more than 20 years across healthcare marketing, customer engagement, operations, and enterprise strategy within highly regulated environments, including Medicare and Medicaid. Throughout my career, I've worked closely across legal, compliance, technology, sales, operations, and executive leadership to help move complex initiatives from strategy to execution. And that perspective matters because AI governance is no longer separate from operational execution itself. It's deeply connected to workflows, ownership, accountability, and decision-making across the enterprise. And that brings us to one of the biggest challenges organizations are facing right now. So let's get to it. AI is moving faster than governance. Most organizations still don't have a clear line of sight across the workflows where AI is being tested, adopted, or embedded. And that's where risk starts to build. Not necessarily because teams are acting irresponsibly, but because the operating structure hasn't caught up to the speed of the technology. What makes this even more challenging is that AI is no longer isolated to a single department or workflow. It's becoming embedded across the broader operational ecosystem itself. In marketing, AI is no longer limited to content generation or isolated automation tools. It's reshaping how organizations manage customer engagement across the entire life cycle. AI is now influencing segmentation, personalization, outreach timing, channel orchestration, customer experience, workflow automation, and operational decision-making simultaneously across the enterprise. And in many organizations, those capabilities are becoming embedded across marketing, CRM, data operations, contact centers, and engagement workflows all at the same time. That creates a very different operational challenge because governance can no longer operate separately from the workflow itself. If AI is influencing how organizations communicate, engage, personalize, and make decisions in real time, governance has to be embedded directly into that operational ecosystem as well. And right now, that's where many organizations are struggling because governance structures are not evolving at the same pace as execution. To give you a visual, this is the pace discrepancy organizations are dealing with right now. AI-generated content, campaigns, and workflow automation are accelerating rapidly. But governance and approval structures are often moving much more slowly. As that gap widens, organizations start entering a risk zone where ownership becomes unclear, approvals become inconsistent, and workflow visibility begins to break down. And in regulated environments, those operational gaps become especially important. This is where AI becomes a governance issue inside CMS-regulated marketing environments. AI can absolutely improve personalization, outreach coordination, member engagement, and operational efficiency across the customer lifecycle. But in regulated environments, scale without governance creates a very different level of exposure. Because AI is now influencing how organizations generate content, personalize communications, trigger outreach, route engagement workflows, and apply messaging logic across multiple systems simultaneously. And when governance structures are fragmented, risk enters the workflow quietly. Review checkpoints become inconsistent, approval ownership becomes unclear, messaging logic varies across teams, channels, and data sources. In CMS-regulated environments, those inconsistencies matter. Outreach timing rules, approved language requirements, disclaimers, escalation pathways, auditability, and communication standards all require operational consistency and clear governance oversight. Organizations also need visibility into where AI-generated or AI-assisted content is being introduced, how messaging is approved, what data sources are influencing personalization logic, and whether workflows remain aligned to regulatory requirements. Because once AI scales fragmented processes, organizations can unintentionally scale compliance exposure at the same time. AI increases scale. Governance determines control. And when that control structure doesn't exist, organizations begin experiencing downstream operational repercussions across compliance, operations, and member experience. The repercussions of speed without structure don't always appear immediately. As mentioned before, in many organizations, they build quietly inside disconnected workflows. Regulatory exposure can happen when outreach timing, approved language, review checkpoints, or escalation pathways aren't consistently governed across systems and teams. Consumer confusion increases when messaging differs across channels, personalization logic becomes fragmented, or engagement experiences lose continuity across the customer lifecycle. And operational risk builds when systemic issues repeat silently, inconsistent processes begin scaling across the enterprise, and accountability across teams becomes harder to trace. That's one of the biggest challenges organizations are facing right now. AI can absolutely increase speed, scale, and efficiency. But when governance structures, ownership, and workflow oversight don't evolve alongside that acceleration, organizations unintentionally scale exposure at the same time. And over time, something even more critical begins to break down. Organizations lose clear line of sight across how decisions are actually being made. This is where visibility starts to break down operationally. Marketing is moving quickly, compliance is often forced into a reactive position, and operations can become disconnected from decisions being made upstream. And when those workflows operate in silos, organizations lose clear line of sight across how decisions are actually being made throughout the operational lifecycle. That's not just a technology issue, it's a structural issue. Because once visibility breaks down, accountability becomes significantly harder to trace, manage, and defend across teams and systems, especially in CMS-regulated environments, where oversight, approvals, escalation pathways, and communication governance must remain visible, explainable, and operationally defensible. And that leads to another major challenge organizations are facing right now. Many are trying to implement AI before the operational foundation required to support it actually exists. One of the biggest mistakes organizations are making is trying to implement AI before they've fully defined the operational problem they're actually trying to solve. Leaders are understandably enthusiastic about AI adoption. But in many environments, organizations haven't clearly identified whether the core issue is workflow efficiency, customer engagement, operational visibility, fragmented data, unclear ownership, or governance maturity itself. And without that clarity, AI often gets layered on top of an already disconnected operational structure. In many cases, the data isn't ready. Ownership across workflows is inconsistent. Lifecycle management remains fragmented across teams and systems, which means AI may accelerate activity, but it doesn't automatically create alignment, accountability, or operational clarity. That still requires governance, defined workflows, and human-in-the-loop oversight. Because AI cannot solve organizational misalignment on its own. Operational alignment has to come first. And for many organizations, that means stepping back and rethinking the operational architecture supporting execution itself. So, if visibility, ownership, and accountability are breaking down operationally, the next question becomes, what has to change structurally? To scale AI responsibly, organizations need to build the architecture around governed execution. That begins with a governance foundation that defines rules, accountability, escalation pathways, and risk boundaries. From there, governance has to become embedded directly into the workflow itself. So oversight is integrated into how work actually gets done, not operating separately from it. And finally, human-in-the-loop oversight must keep decisions visible, reviewable, explainable, and operationally defensible across teams and systems. Especially in CMS-regulated environments where communication governance, approvals, and escalation accountability cannot disappear inside automation. This becomes the strategic layer that stabilizes execution as AI adoption accelerates. Because responsible AI is not just about technology, it's about operational architecture. And once that architecture exists, organizations can begin moving from fragmented execution toward governed execution. Governed execution requires operational discipline built directly into the workflow. That means clear ownership over approvals, escalation pathways, and risk accountability. It means defined review checkpoints before outreach, personalization, or communications go live. And it requires consistent data governance and approved messaging standards across systems, teams, and channels. In fragmented environments, ownership becomes ambiguous, review turns reactive, and disconnected data sources begin creating inconsistent experiences across the customer lifecycle. But in governed environments, authority is clear, checkpoints are embedded into execution, and approved communication logic is consistently applied across the enterprise. This is not about creating bureaucracy. It's about creating operational consistency, defensibility, and trust at scale. Because ultimately, governance only works when it becomes operationalized inside the organization itself. And as AI becomes increasingly embedded across enterprise workflows, governance can no longer operate as a separate layer outside the system. It has to become embedded as well. But many organizations still think about AI as something separate. Separate from governance, separate from compliance, separate from operations, separate from the customer experience itself. AI isn't separate anymore. And this is worth repeating, especially in CMS-regulated environments. AI is embedded across content, data, workflows, channels, decisions, and operational processes throughout the enterprise, which means governance has to become embedded too. Oversight can't exist outside the system while decisions are being made inside it. And in regulated environments, that embedded visibility becomes critical for maintaining accountability, defensibility, and operational trust at scale. Because responsible AI depends on organizations aligning leadership, governance structure, and workflow execution together. And that alignment is what creates visibly across the operational lifecycle. It starts with leadership alignment, establishing shared agreement around risk appetite, ownership, accountability, and escalation responsibility. Then governance structure, which we just talked about, defines the checkpoints, approval pathways, and decision rights required to support responsible execution. And finally, integrated workflows connect marketing, sales, compliance, data operations, and oversight teams through a shared operational line of sight. Because visibility is not created through dashboards alone. It's created when governance, workflow execution, and accountability structures are connected operationally. Most organizations already have pieces of this model. Very few have it fully connected. And that's the opportunity in front of organizations right now. Not just implementing AI faster, but building the operational architecture required to scale it responsibly. Thank you for joining this Goventra Academy executive briefing. At Goventra, we help organizations facilitate these conversations, identify operational and governance gaps, align leadership teams, and build more connected frameworks for responsible AI execution. Our mission is to help organizations strengthen both governance literacy and operational capability, from executive leaders shaping strategy to teams applying governance within day-to-day workflows and decisions. Because responsible AI is not just a technology initiative. It's an operational, organizational, and leadership responsibility. If these challenges are relevant to your organization, we'd welcome the opportunity to continue the conversation. You can connect with Goventra through our website, LinkedIn, or the Goventra Academy YouTube series. And thank you again for spending time with us today.